Hello, my name is Samo Uhan from the University of Ljubljana, Faculty of Social Sciences. We will discuss some topics about EU citizenship in a globalizing world. So, citizenships mean different things to different people and it may be analyzed from various angles and perspectives. However, many scholars agree that the following three dimensions are crucial when defining citizenship, namely rights, identity, and participation. According to the so-called citizenship approach, these three dimensions constitute the cornerstones in an empirical analytical concept of citizenship. One of the advantages of the citizenship approach is that it bridges the instrumental approaches to citizenship, the normative and more empirical approaches, and the approaches that emphasize the legal status of citizenship and the practice of citizenship. Basically, citizenship defines citizens as members of a political community or society. The point of departure is in the classical distinction between the relation between citizens and the political system, the state, the vertical dimension on the one hand, and the relations between citizens, the horizontal dimension on the other. In different ways and to different extent, rights, identities, and participation are enacted with these vertical and horizontal dimensions. Rights, and of course duties, specify the formal status of citizenship. For example, the institutionalized rights and duties, first and foremost civil, political, and social rights. However, rights may also be interpreted in a sociological sense, utilizing the concept of empowerment. Empowerment contains two dimensions. First, an institutional dimension, for example, the structure of civil, political, and social rights in a given country, and two, a subjective dimension which focuses on citizens' acquisition of competencies to utilize existing rights. Broadly speaking, participation defines any mode of participation in social and public life, and in this manner it includes political as well as social participation. Participation is not restricted to citizens' exploitation of their former political rights, first and foremost the right to vote, but includes various modes of political participation. For example, campaign and party activities, individual containing participation and political movements, political manifestations, and so on, and participation in social and cultural organizations and associations. In addition to this, it is not only the actual participation that is important. From a political culture and in turn democratic perspective, citizens' feeling of political efficiency is equally important. Political efficiency consists of two dimensions: internal, a concept that is closely related to element and verba. Verba's classical concept of subjective political competence, and external efficacy, citizens' perception of the responsibility of the political system. A condition for well-functioning democracy is that people agree on certain democratic norms. The dimension of democratic and more broadly political identity defines citizens' orientations and attitudes as members of political community. These orientations and attitudes are related to the vertical as well as the horizontal dimension of citizenship. As regards the former, it contains elements of support to the political system and regimes, principles, and citizens' trust in the political institutions and political actors. Aspects of citizens' social and political tolerance, social trust, and political solidarity with fellow citizens relates to the horizontal dimension of political identity. As mentioned, the empirical analytical concept of citizenship allows scholars to apply different perspectives depending on their specific research interests. Two general problem areas may be highlighted there. The problem of inclusion, exclusion, including the extent of rights, and the challenges of globalization to citizenship. A tension is created by the power of citizenship to define who is included and excluded. This may be interpreted as a question of what group possess certain political and social rights, both in legal and sociological sense. Inclusion and exclusion on the basis of social class was the basis of the influential work of Marshall. More recently, problems of exclusion have been raised in relation to immigrant groups, a problem that seems more and more urgent in the light of increasing globalization. Equally important, traditional constructions of citizenship, in particular who are entitled to what rights and who are not, may also ignore perspectives of ethnic groups, women, disabled persons, etc., etc. The problem of inclusion, exclusion is also applicable in a broader sense. This occurs first in relation to the increasing emergence of governance structures, for example, more or less formal political institutions and networks, including transnational organizations and trade agreements, and second, in relation to other non-institutionalized modes of participation and political identification. The challenges of globalization to citizenship are two-sided. We may distinguish between analyzing globalization as an independent variable and embryonic global citizenship as a dependent variable. The former focuses on the implications of globalization for citizenship in the respective nation states, for example, the problem of increasing immigration and the effect of globalization on existing social rights in the nation states. The latter, on the contrary, focuses on the question of whether a kind of embryonic global citizenship is emerging from the level of citizens from below, despite the lack of legal political acknowledgement of global citizenship. In most modern accounts of citizenship, it is assumed that citizenship only is an attribute of the state. This makes perfect sense since most legal political rights and duties are constituted in the respective national citizenship political systems. Considering the intensification of economic, cultural, and political globalization, however, it seems relevant to analyze whether people participate with the objective of trying to influence global political institutions and global issues, for example, by participating in the organizations that define global civil society. In the context of the ongoing processes of globalization, nation states are slowly losing their monopoly on the concept of citizenship and especially citizenship rights. Citizenship status, rights and duties are no longer defined by membership of a nation state, that is by national citizenship. This has remodeling the classical concept of national citizenship along the lines of a kind of post-national citizenship, which I understand as a synthesis based on A, the new phenomena emerging from the globalizing processes, and the B, the way in which both the classical concept of citizenship, republican and liberal, have attempted to accommodate these processes. The need for remodeling is evident through a number of theoretical discussions and also empirical studies. On the one hand, the theoretical discussions mostly focus on the macro level of countries on the global perspective. On the other hand, empirical studies mostly deal with the various dimensions of citizenships at the micro level, individual level. Empirical studies that combine both macro and micro levels are very rare. The classical concept of national citizenship is in fact grounded in the republican concept, whereby citizenship is limited by the boundaries of the nation state, which grants citizenship status and associated rights and duties, of course. Adherence to a community and the political action of the citizens on behalf of a community are key dimensions with the republican concept of citizenship. At the heart of this concept of citizenship lies the notion of political participation, which is linked to certain competencies that assure the equality of the chosen, while excluding an important part of the population which are not citizens. In this sense, national citizenship is constructed around institutionalized racism because it excludes outsiders from access to entitlements typically on the basis of a racial or national identity. Within the classical approach of citizenship, liberal concept has appeared much later. Relationship between the individual and the state is within the framework of liberal concept defined by a set of civil rights which the state must respect and simultaneously not interfere in the individual's life. Regardless the differences between two concepts, the background presupposition of classical, modern paradigm of citizenship is that citizenship involves membership in a sovereign territorial nation state. The nation state is not only a territorial organization monopolizing legitimate rule within bounded space, it is also a membership organization. Citizenship in such a state is an instrument of social closure. Over the past decade, variants of the so-called liberal citizenship model, which highlights the individual's universal legal status, have appeared as a response to the differences of classical concepts. According to this concept, the citizen is not a political actor, but a legal person who abides by the laws and may expect legal protection by the state. The core of this legal reconceptualization of citizenship is the individual's universal legal status and individual rights. The universality of citizens' rights is not bound to a specific collective identity, membership, demos, or territory, but it may be compatible with different the statuses and identities of individual. This means greater individualization, and as various research has shown, the decline of some forms of political participation. Individuals with multiple identities develop weaker group identity, or as stated by the Turner, cool loyalty or a thin solidarity in relation to the nation, to local communities or class. Political participation thus becomes more individualized, unbound to specific territory, to a political community or to a social group. Citizenship is thus becoming cosmopolitan in various ways, such as the internationalization of human rights, a large volume of migration, and the formation of transnational countries. Despite some optimistic forecasts at the beginning of these processes, these changes are also bring new forms of inequality, exclusion, and injustice, which are related to the fact that more and more complex citizenship relations are emerging. The simple dichotomous division between citizens and non-citizens is complemented by the development of new citizen statuses. Kate Nash, for example, lists the following super citizens, marginal citizens, quasi-citizens, sub-citizens, uncitizens, and so on, etc., etc. Due to several global social currents that have challenged the nation state as the basis of modern concept of citizenship, several authors have discussed the possibilities of developing a new concept of citizenship. The process of globalization in general and with its various specific norms has been one of the main reference points in this discussion. The following aspects of the globalization process are also of special importance of our discussion. The emergence of transnational or supranational bodies, including the European Union, the expanding power of global capitalism, empire, intense international migration, the intense development of modern communications and information technology. In such a globalizing world, the nation state is not an exclusive source of individual citizen rights. The nation state framework as a space for practicing citizenship from the top and from the bottom has become too constraining. The inclusive territoriality and sovereignty inherent in the nation state model of citizenship are being transformed by the emergence of transnational economic practices and supranational legal regimes and post-national political bodies. The consideration of individual citizens is particularly relevant in light of the processes of globalization. Apart from citizens' rights and duties, we have here in mind two aspects of citizenship. The membership of a community and the participation in community framework. In terms of membership, we mean the following. The individual loses a solid reference point. There is a complexity of identities. The collective identities of individuals are becoming weaker, which at first sight leads to an atomization of citizens. It is not only the deconstruction of national identity, but the general decline in the loyalty to any particular community. With the disappearance of traditional adherences, there are also changes in the field of social and political participation. On the one hand, we see a decline in organized social and political participation, while on the other hand, studies show the emergence of new forms of civic action and increase in the volume of non-conventional and individualized forms of participation. In this respect, we share the view of Joe Painter, who regards the concept of citizenship in a global era as a kind of synthesis of the traditional concept of citizenship, where the main characteristic of this synthesis should be the idea of multi-level citizenship, multi-level political communities, the coexistence of different levels of democratic governance from the local to global, multiple identities, and postmodern, post-materialistic values, and so on. Synthesis can also be seen as the overcoming of the contradictions of the combining of the Republican and the liberal concepts of citizenship, communitarism, and individualisms. Citizenship models emerging within these processes and could be generally described by the term post-national citizenship. So, what can survey data tell us? Our main empirical research question asks whether we can find the elements of factors of postmodern concept of global citizenship in the situation where nation states are still the main source of the dominant model of citizenship. In this situation, we can search for tracks of elements of the new concept of citizenship, at least of the following two levels, or as a combination of these two levels. A, on a contextual level, which from the analytical point of view means different comparisons of nation states or elements and factors which are observed at the level of nation states. And B, on the level of the attributes of individuals. For example, attitudes, competence, behavior, socialization, status, and so on. Parallel to understanding citizenship as the relationship between an individual and the state, we are observing separately and various combinations, dimensions of the model of possible global citizenship by means of indicators at the level of individual citizens and the level of countries. We focus on the level of individuals, and for this purpose we use survey data from the international surveys, from the citizenship module of the International Social Survey Program, which has applied in 39 countries, and the European Social Survey, which was conducted in 22 countries, 21 European countries, and Israel. Using this data, we are able to observe different indicators of several dimensions of global citizenship. We are particularly interested in the following 5 dimensions. First, attitudes towards transnational or global civil society and governance. 2, normative perceptions about citizens' duties. How does good citizens look like? 3, tolerance and understanding of minority rights. 4, citizens' empowerment, their political competence. And 5, citizens' involvement and political participation. We follow the idea that we can trace seeds of the concept of postmodern citizenship at the level of citizens, social and political attitudes, perceptions, evaluations, and their political behavior. Yet we also pay attention to the macro level of the contextual or systemic elements of a possible new concept of citizenship. In that respect, we compare and classify countries nation states on the basis of individual aggregated characteristics. We expect that differences and similarities between countries regarding the presence or extent of different individual dimensions of the postmodern concept of citizenship correspondent to differences and similarities on the contextual level. For example, in countries where several systemic elements or conditions of a possible new concept of citizenship are present, we can also expect that their citizens express these facts through their political attitudes and behavior. If I first describe the global situation, data from ISSP 2004. Data from the ISSP citizenship module offer us a possibility to observe the presence of postmodern concept of citizenship in the global worldwide comparative level. Countries from all continents are included in the survey. Using these data, we are able to observe the following indicators of the 5 dimensions of global citizenship. First, support for transnational civil society and for global governance, attitudes on the relationship between national governance and the United Nations, and preference for the inclusions of citizens organization in international organizations. Second, normative perception of responsible citizen. Citizens should show the following civic virtues: supervision of the government performance, political and social participation, political empathy and tolerance, solidarity, and so on. And third, conditions of rights and universal non-exclusive category, tolerance, respect, minorities. Fourth, subjective competence, self-evaluation of the ability to follow and understood politics. And the fifth, the individuals as an active citizen, selected indicators of political participation, measuring intentional and self-determined activities. For developing a typology or classification of countries on the basis of aggregated individual data, we use the cluster method. The process of the stepwise joining of units, countries, on the basis of the similarities and differences between them. We compare countries regarding the above-mentioned 5 dimensions of the hypothetical postmodern concept of citizenship. We ascribe to countries as units of classification aggregated individual data. For example, the proportion of respondents who support a certain statement, an average value of answers on a measurement scale. The revision of results suggests a decision to adopt 6 meaningful clusters of countries. The first group of 3 typical clusters connects countries with a clear presence of the dimensions of postmodern concept of citizenship. Most of these countries are developed democratic countries. Cluster 1. Cluster 1, economically developed countries with a longer tradition of consolidated democracy. For example, Australia, Austria, Canada, Denmark, Finland, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, Sweden, and Switzerland. All countries in this cluster are classified as free countries scored with the highest rating according to the classification of the Freedom House. In this group of countries, we can see the high support of respondents for the role of the United Nations. This is also the group with the highest proportion of active citizens while the proportion of citizens that sees themselves as competent is also well above the average. It is interesting that in the countries of this group we cannot speak of a high level of support for the normative concept of a responsible citizen. We can also conclude that the countries in this cluster don't confront any serious problem that the countries in this cluster don't confront of systemic corruption. Here we find the highest proportion of respondents who don't see corruption as a problem in their countries. Cluster 2, new and old European democracies and Israel, Belgium, Flanders, France, Germany, East and West, Great Britain, Slovenia, Spain and Israel. With the exception of Israel, all countries from this group have also received the highest Freedom House rating. The most visible characteristics of the group is the high support given for the role of the United Nations, although it is not as high in the first as in the first cluster. Considering all other dimensions, countries in these groups are at the average level. Like in the first group, support for the normative concept of responsible citizen is also below average in this group. Cluster 3, the United States and Ireland. Split support for the role of the United Nations is characteristic of these two countries. This is high support for intervention of the United Nations in the case a country seriously violates human rights, but simultaneously fewer respondents are in favor at a stronger United Nations. The citizens of both countries, broadly well above average, support the idea that citizens organizations should be directly involved in the decision-making process in the international organization. Compared to the other clusters, the proportion of respondents that sees themselves as politically competent is the highest in this cluster. There is also wide support for the normative concept of responsible citizen in both countries of the cluster. The second group consists of three other clusters of countries where we are unable to speak of the clear and unambiguous presence of elements of the postmodern concept of citizenship. Cluster 4, we can find here new democracies from the third wave of democratization with recent experience of authoritarian rule: Portugal, Bulgaria, Hungary, Latvia, Poland, Russia, Slovakia, Chile and Taiwan. According to the Freedom House rating, all countries in the cluster are classified as free democratic countries, although not with the highest rating. There are two exceptions: Portugal with the highest rating and Russia that is classified as a partly free country. Considering the dimensions of the postmodern concept of citizenship, the most important characteristic of the cluster are the following: a very low proportion of participation and low proportion of citizens that see themselves as politically competent. According to the respondents' perspectives, a very small proportion of respondents don't see corruption as a problem. We can say that the countries in this cluster have problems with systemic corruption. Cluster 5, a group of 4 very different countries: Czech Republic, Cyprus, Japan, South Korea. Although 3 of them, Cyprus, South Korea and Czech Republic, have experience with separation. The main characteristics of the cluster are the low, very low, below average presence of all dimensions of postmodern citizenship. There is only one exception, a somewhat higher proportion of support for a stronger United Nations. Cluster 6. 3 Latin American countries and 1 Asian country with specific economic experience and with different experiences of democratic deficit: Mexico, Uruguay, Venezuela, and Philippines. The most outstanding characteristics of the cluster is the very high proportion of respondents who support the idea that citizens' organizations should be directly involved in the decision-making processes in international organizations. But at the same time, there is a low proportion of those who support a strong United Nations. We can also see a high extent of support for minority rights and for normative concept of responsible citizen. On the other side, there is a low level of citizens' participation and low proportion of respondents who evaluate themselves as competent to participate in or follow political events. According to the perceptions of respondents, countries in this group are facing a big extent of systemic corruption. If I now describe European situation, we use data from the European Social Survey. Data from the European Social Survey also offer us a limited possibility to observe the presence of some elements of postmodern concept of citizenship on the European comparative level. We compared 21 European countries and Israel was excluded from the analysis. Using this data, we are able to observe the following indicators. Following indicators of the 5 dimensions of global citizenship: support for international global governance, a normative perception of good citizens as an active citizen, tolerance toward immigrants and cultural diversity, subjective competence and individual protest and political actions. Using the same procedure as for the ISSP data, clustering method of aggregated data on country level, we have, on the basis of these 5 dimensions of global postmodern citizenship, obtained a classification of European countries. Results suggest that the classification into 3 groups of countries is the most meaningful solution. Group 1 is the biggest, 12 countries, and it consists mostly of old democracies from Western and Central Europe. There are only few exceptions: Spain, Hungary, and Czech Republic. The group is very heterogeneous, and it could be split into several subgroups. But in general, the group is outstanding regarding higher citizens' openness for religious and cultural diversity. It probably reflects their actual situation of cultural diversity and their historical experience. Group 2 consists of 4 Scandinavian countries: Denmark, Finland, Norway, and Sweden. It seems as the group with the most widespread elements of post-modern citizenship. In this group of countries, we can see the highest trust of respondents in the United Nations. This is also the group with the highest proportion of active citizens. On the other side, in the countries of this group, we cannot speak of particularly high level of support for the normative concept of an active citizen. Group 3 includes some European countries, Greece, Italy and Portugal, and two post-socialist countries, Poland and Slovenia. We can say that all these countries are new democracies from the third wave of democratization. All countries from this group are also very homogeneous from ethnic and religious point of view, and of course we can assume that this characteristic is reflected by the fact that citizens of countries from this group express lower tolerance towards immigrant and towards cultural diversity. There is also low level of individualized protest political participation, while on the other side we can see a high extent of support for a normative concept of an active citizen. The result may be discussed in various ways. One of them is offered by Stephen Castells. Castells has developed a classification that consists of 5 groups of countries, from those where elements of citizenship are fully realized, to those where we cannot find any elements of citizenship, and where, if we use Castells' words, we can only speak of non-citizens. Like in Castells' classification, we can, on the basis of our analysis on the global level, identify 2 big groups of countries. The first group consists of highly developed countries with a long democratic tradition and fully established democratic institutions. We can find here just 2 exceptions, Slovenia and Spain, both from the third wave of democratization. This group corresponds with the first 2 of Castells' group, the United States and highly developed countries from the European Union and Canada and also Australia. The second group consists of 2 subgroups of less developed countries. Japan is the only exception. New democracies from the third wave of democratization in Europe, and other countries with a democratic deficit from Latin America and Asia. The group strongly corresponds to Castells' third group, transnational and intermediate countries with lower standards of rights and legal protection. Considering the results of our analysis, we can pose the following question. In which part of the world can the elements and conditions for the postmodern of citizenship be found? There is no uniform answer to this. Although elements of the concept are present in both groups, it is obvious that we can only find institutional conditions, democratic institutions, legal order, rights and so on, and political cultural elements in the first group. In the second group, we can only speak of some citizens' support for global governance or a global civil society as a reaction to the democratic deficit in their countries. In general, the analysis on European data reveals the same pattern. In highly developed countries with longer democratic tradition, particularly Scandinavian countries, we can find more elements of postmodern citizenship. We can see very clear pattern of positive correlation between trust in United Nations, a kind of global governance, and support for equal rights for immigrants. We can observe the highest level of both in Scandinavian countries. But we also find some interesting results which put under question mark the consistency of our model of postmodern citizenship. Namely, in countries with high support for a normative concept of an active citizen, we can find very low individualized protest political activities of citizens. This is typically for countries from the third European group: Greece, Italy, Poland, Portugal, and Slovenia. When we observe all analyzed European countries, we are not able to find a clear pattern. On the basis of presence of two dimensions, we can only classify countries in three groups. A group with very low level of participation, less developed new democracies from the south and east, and B group with moderate level of participation, old Western democracies. Group with high level of participation, this is C group, highly developed Scandinavian countries and Switzerland. Within each of these groups, we are able to reveal the following pattern: negative correlation between extent of individual political activities and extent of normative perception of good citizens as an active citizens. So, does this mean we need a new paradigm? Thesis that the nation state is completely anachronous are unfounded. The nation state remains sovereign in many respects. Its role is still important in assuring the legal, social, and economic security of citizens, and it remains an indisputable authority in ensuring its territorial integrity. The impacts of globalization on diminishing the sovereignty of nation states are primarily evident in areas related to ecology, the economy, and military security. The demands of individuals and minorities for the assurance of special rights, whether ethnic or other minorities, are more strongly articulated, and the obligation of states regarding issues that stretch across national borders are more pronounced. In this respect, the claim that full rights can only be accorded to individuals who are permanent residents and assimilated into a dominant culture model is losing ground. The challenges of multiculturalism and the rights of non-citizens who don't intend or want to become citizens. These challenges necessitate the constructions of a theoretical framework that treats the individual's legal status as a principle of membership in an abstract state or political system, separating it from the classical citizen status. But here is thus not sufficient to decouple the rights of citizens and the recognized rights of members of minorities. Instead, the model of the three components has to be extended or replaced with a synthesis which would mean a higher political level. At the practical level, this means enable individuals to enjoy a relatively broad spectrum of citizenship rights, even not formally as citizens of the state they are living in. It also means that the citizens of particular country rely on a supranational legal and political body for the protection of their rights. Both options exclude the full sovereignty of the nation state over its residents, at the same time emphasize the significance of civil society in contemporary democracies. Demands for broadening special rights or for new forms of protection of rights, irrespective of formal citizenship, are related to strengthening of course, civil society. As the civil sphere of society expands, the conditions are created for the socialization of economic and technological processes unfolding at the supranational level of simultaneously for a framework enabling the individual to articulate influential on political processes. The creation of an international civil society thus lends political weight to the universality of human rights. The serious deficiencies of international political civil society bodies must not be overlooked here, namely the legitimacy or democratic deficiency. It is possible to have democracy without a demos. Of course, this is evident in the abstractness of this discourse on political rights and the absence of subjects with cloud that can assure the exercise of rights. The emergence of international non-governmental organizations partly addresses this deficiency and primarily lays down a normative framework for the implementation of the principles of global political culture. The function of the postmodern concept of citizenships in Cohen's view transcends both the liberal and the republican models of citizenship, insofar as the weakness of the liberal model lies in its underestimation of democratic participation and its failure to shape a symbolic identity, and consequently it suffers from a deficit of political legitimacy, while the most important weaknesses of the republican model is its exclusivity. Hence, the primary role of the postmodern model is to strengthen the universality of human rights, their international institutionalization and articulation at all levels to strengthen and protect the rights of individuals and groups. Of course, the foregoing does not imply accepting the notion of the perception of civil society. Civil organizations can also be unfair, non-egalitarian, and exclusive, as many examples show. For precisely this reason, the greatest challenge facing civil society organizations is probably the implementation of democratic principles in their operations. Here, the issue of identity arises again as a motivating force. The question then is how to determine the place of democratic participation in the model of the postmodern paradigm of citizenship, which asserts political rights and defines them at various levels of the abstract political body, which relinquishes the fantasy of absolutely poverty, authority, and identity as such. The answer seems very simple. If citizenship in the postmodern paradigm is to have any meaning, it has to include democratic participation with the experience of power and not just influence, that is the possibility of legislation and policies. Here it is important that the rights of these non-citizens are treated as universal rights and not as special rights. it would be very naive to expect that a postmodern paradigm to completely diffuse the tensions between the various components of the concept of citizenship. But these tensions can be reduced by relinquishing the exclusive notion of the territorially sovereignty, by boosting the plurality of instances, protecting the rights of the individual, and by precisely defining the key rights international institutions assure the individuals as a member of civil society and as a member of transnational organizations. The postmodern paradigm also requires consideration of the dimensions of identity. The question of national identity in the postmodern paradigm is open for democratic redefinition, but the entire concept of the identity has been reshaped and made more responsive to the existence of different kinds of identity. Various levels of allegiance have to be determined, and of course the loci of identity, local, regional, national, and global, have to be defined. The postmodern paradigm also requires the differentiation of the forms of political participation and determination of the intersections of rights, duties, and allegiances in the global context. All of this has institutional implications. The implementation of a postmodern paradigm of citizenship is not seen as creating some super federation or some world government, and similarity not as the adoption of cosmopolitan legal order. It will probably be incumbent on all governments to strengthen their receptors for the inputs of civil society. So I share the view of Joe Painter, who sees the post-modern paradigm of citizenship as a kind of synthesis of classical conceptions of citizenship, where the main characteristic of this synthesis should be the idea of multi-level citizenship, multi-level political communities, civil societies, to the coexistence of different levels of democratic governance, from local to global. Multiple situational identities, and of course postmodern, post-materialistic values, environmentalism, tolerance, and so on. Thank you very much.